Puget Sound values here, you'll see in 2009 that doubling suddenly turned around. And what happened here is that in 2004, Canada banned 2 of the 3 products, and the United States had a voluntary withdrawal of those same 2 products at the same time. So 2 of the 3 PBD products were removed from market end of 2004. That's Penta and Octa. Deca remained on the market, and Deca is the subject of scrutiny. I believe there's a voluntary withdrawal that US EPA has negotiated with the manufacturer that will take effect in 2013 or 2014 for Deca PBDEs, and at the same time Canada has announced a ban for Deca as well. So the good news story, bad news story is it's been doubling every 3 years. That's a very rapid emergence of a priority concern. In fact, the PBD concentrations in Puget Sound biota today are higher than the concentrations of DDT. So PBDEs have displaced DDT as the #2 chemical of concern in food web in Puget Sound. And that's after many decades of PCBs and DDT having the #1-2 spot by a long shot. So this was a troubling development. This is a very personal one too, because most of you will know that PBDEs aren't just industrial chemicals used in heavy industrial applications or transformers. PBDEs are flame retardant additive chemical that have been put in all sorts of consumer items. They're in polyurethane foam. If you bought a couch in the late 1980s or the 1990s or the 2000s, chances are, certainly if it has the California TB117 mark on the label, it's got PBDEs. And so what this means is we've got PBDEs in furniture, we've got PBDEs in consumer electronics, we've got them in seats. What's going to happen to those? Well, this is one of the reasons sewage effluent and landfill leachate has very high concentrations of PBDEs, because a lot of these consumer products are either being cleaned and washed and getting into the sewage stream, or they're ending in landfill dumps, etc., and then out into the ocean. So it's going to take some time, I think, to turn this one around. And with all the bans looming or in place, I have yet to see a good plan for disposal of these consumer products. I haven't really seen any. So just 3 slides, and I'm almost finished here. 3 slides just to remind us of the global implications of what we do in terms of chemical management or pollution or responses to pollution. And I think this is important for this audience because everyone in here is really, if you're talking about killer whales, you're talking about really a global icon. You're talking about an animal that really transcends the boundaries of the state of Washington. Because they, of course, are going back and forth between BC and Washington State. Their food supply is coming from the open Pacific, or spends a lot of its time in the open Pacific. These killer whales are global citizens, and as such, we not only have to work in our local backyard, but we also have to work with our international partners, whether it's the US with Canada, or both the US and Canada with China, for example. And this is where global treaties become important. The Stockholm Convention, signed into treaty form in 2004, became effective in 2004, targeted the persistent organic pollutants, including the PCBs, the dioxins, DDT, a lot of the organic chlorine compounds, and it now has taken on the 2 lighter forms of the PBDEs. And essentially, it provides a global treaty, a convention saying no signatory is allowed to trade, manufacture, dispose of, or use any of these chemicals because they present a risk to human health or the health of the environment. The Rio Declaration, this is always a nice one to just sit back and read. In order to protect the environment, the precautionary approach shall be widely applied by states according to their capabilities. Where there are threats of serious or irreversible harm, lack of full scientific certainty shall not be used as a reason for postponing cost-effective measures to prevent environmental degradation. We're going to get this a lot with recovering killer whales. Do you really know that PCBs are killing them? Where's your proof? Well, I'm never going to be able to prove that. The killer whales have thousands of chemicals in their bodies and are subject to all sorts of different threats, as well as Mother Nature. It's very, very difficult to do laboratory-style experimentation with killer whales. But a weight of evidence and a precautionary approach does provide an avenue for making informed decisions. These legal battles we heard about this afternoon with regard to the listing or delisting of southern resident killer whales, this is where these sorts of arguments will be borne out in courts of law. But from a scientific perspective, we're never going to prove these things without a shadow of a doubt. But that doesn't mean that there's scientific information that one can assemble from multiple lines of evidence and to provide reasonable and defensible weight of evidence in support of either actions or remediation opportunities. The law of the sea, fairly straightforward. Article number 2004 states, and by this they mean nations shall endeavor to observe, measure, evaluate, and analyze by recognized scientific methods the risks of pollution of the marine environment. Yeah, it seems to make sense to me. And why do we do this research? Well, we do it not because we want to create the bad news story that people grumble about or don't want to ultimately hear sometimes, but when we monitor the health of the ocean, whatever the form, it helps to tell us when something is going wrong, when we are failing the killer whales or failing the protection environment. We've helped to identify priority pollutants and to target those chemicals for either source control or regulations and thereby improve ocean health. But because there's so many other chemicals in the sewage stream or the industrial train, we've got an awful lot of things that we don't know about in the ocean, and that's where continued vigilance is very important. And when it comes to marine mammals, we've got cetaceans that live beyond a century or two. They have tremendous habitat needs. They may be, well, certainly mobile, often coastal. Many are migratory, top predators. All of these ecological underpinnings can make them extraordinarily vulnerable. And it's understanding these ecological or biological issues related to their habitat use or feeding ecology or lifestyle. That is what will really empower recovery or conservation planning. And I think the faces today tell another story, and that's that people around these parts value these animals because they're intelligent, they're sociable, they have their own cultures and languages and means of communicating and sharing and teaching. And the more we learn about them, the more we realize just how special they are and how fortunate we are in this part of the world, and how important it is to do I think the science that will allow us to leave very soft footprints in the sand that will be essentially gone by the next tide. And with that, many people to thank. Thanks again, Ken, for coming out, and thank you for all your work. Continue to look forward to talking to you more over beer tonight. I want to thank my lovely girlfriend up in the back, Tanya, for being so patient and coming with me as I embark on these journeys. But thank you all for coming. I don't know if I have questions, but I'll try to answer them.
Yep. You said that the legacy POPs were mainly fat soluble. I know in the Midwest, atrazine has polluted a vast swath of this country. That's kind of being replaced now by glyphosate and the Roundup products. And I'm wondering, is there any tendency toward looking into glyphosate-type residues in the ocean? Is that something that could become a legacy POP even though it's water soluble?
So the question was, a lot of the focus from a science and regulatory perspective in terms of marine environmental quality has been on the PLPs, the persistent compounds. But as we discussed, a lot of the new chemicals or the new pesticides are more water soluble, such as atrazine or glyphosate. Atrazine is indeed water soluble, very controversial pesticide. It's been banned in Europe not because it's been shown to be highly toxic, but because it's very persistent. and it's water soluble, and when it's used and applied, it gets into groundwater. And the Europeans don't want anything in their groundwater because they rely on it. It's a smaller content. So atrazine, very troubling in that respect, and it's increasingly being shown to be toxic to fish and other critters. Glyphosate, as far as I know, degrades fairly quickly in the aquatic environment, but the bigger problem with glyphosate is the adjuvant, or the so-called inert compounds that are proprietary. They're added to make it either soluble or to stick to plant surfaces or whatever. And there are many types of those adjuvants that are secret that are very toxic. Nonylphenol is one of them. I think it's called 4-NP. It's highly estrogenic. So it'd be nice to see a little bit more clarity with regards to the release of information of the products that are used. I mean, as a toxicologist, I can study atrazine, but if the companies that are selling that, marketing that atrazine are using different formulations in different regions because of climate and or to confuse people like me, then I'm not able to see if those chemicals are harming fish or marine mammals. More immediately, I'm probably less concerned about atrazine and glyphosate at the top of the food web because they're not going to biomagnify. That said, they may present a real risk to salmon that are relying on water, clean water for olfaction, finding their natal stream, etc. That's where the current use pesticides and the stewardship in riparian areas or agriculture areas is very, very important. Thank you.
I have two questions. The first is, how, when you're sampling the harbor seals locally, what is your sampling technique? Are you collecting their scat, or are you taking actual samples? And the second is, how long, once you have data that presents some kind of proof about a pollution source, how long, what's the process that takes it from your point of collection and reporting to an actual regulatory action in government in BC?
Right. So how do we catch harbor seals, number one, and how do we deliver science in support of regulations, and how quickly does that happen? Harbor seals, we live capture. There's a number of techniques. I've got a few bruises, scratches, bumps, and sore aches and pains from the last 20 years of doing that. We live capture them. We typically will catch 4-week-old pups, and we take a blood sample, a little blubber biopsy. We look at their health, we look at the chemicals in their blubber, and then we release them. They're gone in 15 or 20 minutes. They're back with mom, or they're weaned anyway. So they're a great study animal. We can get good sample sizes, excellent animals, excellent information. In terms of publishing our information, I'm a scientist. I publish in the peer-reviewed literature. You can go to the library and get any of our publications. That's our primary modus operandi. In terms of providing advice to policymakers, it's kind of up to the policymakers to read our research or to look at the literature, or the regulators to look at the literature, these publications, to try to discern what they might do or what they might need to do. Or they listen to the public says, what about those PPDs and killer whales? You should do something about those. For someone like me in the government, I do provide advice. Generally, they don't ask for it. I have to force it down their throats because, as I indicated, managers typically in our capitals are really overrun, overworked, and they really don't want another bad news story, another piece of work to do. Yeah, it's a tough. The latter is a tough one because when you discover these things as a scientist, you think, well, it's pretty obvious we should ban that chemical or try to get sewage treatment changed, or and that's not as easy. There are vehicles for government scientists to provide formal advice, but that can be very slow. I will say that on the on the dioxin front, it was a non-profit group. It was Greenpeace that released that information, not in the peer-reviewed literature, but in the press, and they showed the data saying very, very high levels, and that caused the governments in both Canada and States to respond and react very, very quickly. They had no choice. I would say a lot of the regulators would like to just ignore me because I'm trying to provide advice internally. So that's why it's good to publish in the literature, whereby I can give it to you guys, and then Arca Network signs a petition or provides feedback, input through the public consultation process. You heard about the delisting petition. There are usually mechanisms for the public or NGOs to deliver either advice or to push for a decision. The danger in someone like me taking sides and saying you should ban this is I'm stepping outside of science and I'm becoming an advocate. So it's a difficult personal road to follow.
That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
I was confused about one thing. You said that I think the salmon's major contaminant load was from the Pacific Ocean, but then you said it is really important to protect spawning streams. So could you clarify that?
Absolutely, yes. So with salmon returning from the open ocean, the majority of their burden of persistent contaminants is coming from the open ocean. So those persistent contaminants are mostly the legacy ones that are largely banned, but they can present, maybe not a risk to the Chinook, but they could present a risk to killer whales. We've shown it. Killer whales are very contaminated with PCBs because they're eating up to 200 kilograms of Chinook per day. So that's just its biomagnification plus a very long lifespan, living 50, 60, 80 years. Long time, you don't break it down, you just accumulate over your lifetime. In terms of the spawning streams, most of our chemicals and pesticides we use today are not persistent. There are a few, like the PBDs that were grandfathered in and still are. HBCDD used in that blue styrofoam for building envelopes. I think it's on its way out, but it's still there. It's another flame retardant that's persistent. But a lot of the pesticides that you might use or some people use in household applications or around spawning streams will not be ones that will necessarily accumulate in the tissues of salmon, but it can be taken up. It can affect their immune system or their olfactory system. It can cause them to be confused or weaker. There's the urban salmon syndrome in Coho in Seattle. I know they're still trying to figure out what's going on there. So I think that's where you say, okay, I can't control the legacy compounds. We let the genie out of the bottle. I can't control China, but I'll hope that, and I'll push Washington to work on that treaty or to work with China. But what I can do with Puget Sound or on the San Juans is I can protect the salmon spawning stream. And I think that is really underrated. I think it really, really is important, particularly when you look at that super envelope of climate change. We have to create buffers that improve the odds and reduce our impact or our footprint on those some of those prey items.
All the jump from Fukushima, radiation factor with that?
So I heard Fukushima and radiation.
All the jump coming from Fukushima, radiation factor in that?
Excellent question. I think California, Washington, and BC, there have been detects for, I think, cesium-137. So there is some radiation come in. I don't think it's of human health concern. That's what I've heard, is the levels are very, very low. But in terms of objects, I have no idea whether anything radioactive will come over.
We can go on with this. This is really high quality information. So I think